Welcome to meeting number 34 of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021, the committee will proceed to its study of the impact of COVID-19 on seniors. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. We have with us today from CanAge, Laura Tamblin-Watts, President and Chief Executive Officer, and from the Canadian Support Workers Association, Miranda Ferrier, Chief Executive Officer. For the benefit of our witnesses, I'd like to offer a couple of additional comments. Interpretation in this video conference is at the bottom of your screen. You have the choice of either Floor, English, or French. When you're speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. You may notice that with about 1 minute to go, I will hold up the one finger to signal that, and that I will probably incessantly interrupt you. Please forgive me. I apologize in advance. It's kind of my job to try to keep everything on schedule and ensure that the time is allocated fairly between the members. So with that, we're going to start with Ms. Tamblin-Watts. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you today about the pressing issues facing Canadian seniors. My name is Laura Tamblin-Watts, and I'm the President and CEO of CanAge, Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization. We are a pan-Canadian, nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization. We work to advance the rights and well-being of Canadians as we age and ensure that older Canadians live vibrant and connected lives. In the time of COVID-19, however, that has been far from the current reality. I would like to focus my submissions in 3 specific areas: elder abuse and neglect, long-term care and seniors reform, and social inclusion. First, elder abuse and neglect. I'd like to tell you Mabel's story. When COVID-19 hit, Mabel followed all the rules. She stayed home, she worried. Her adult son lost his job and moved into Mabel's house. And soon Mabel was pressured to make a power of attorney, add him to her bank accounts, and eventually be put on as co-owner of her house. Within 12 months, Mabel went from living a safe, socially connected life to one of fear, abuse, and poverty. And Mabel's story is not unique, far from it. Prior to COVID-19, approximately 1 in 5 older Canadians experienced abuse and neglect. Since COVID-19, responding organizations like Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario and others are signaling a 250% increase in abuse and neglect of seniors. We were pleased to see elder abuse mentioned in the budget along with some other forms of abuse for investment, but there's much to be done. We recommend that the government do 2 things to address this. 1, designate on an ongoing basis a similar amount of funding and support for preventing and responding to elder abuse as is given to domestic violence supports. And 2, create a pan-Canadian committee on abuse and neglect. Our second area is long-term care and seniors reform, the one we've been speaking about most during this time of COVID-19. And I want to tell you the story of Stanley. Stanley called me weeping. He was a resident at a long-term care facility in Ontario. He lived through the first wave, was in a shared room with other sick residents, and at one point was left alone next to a friend who'd passed away from COVID-19, but his deceased remains had not been removed. He was living locked up in a 100-square-foot room for months on end, had not been bathed, fed, or changed sometimes for days on end. He'd not had a breath of fresh air for months. When he called me, he was asking how to get medical assistance and dying, not because of his health status, but because life in long-term care during COVID-19 was, in his mind, not worth living any longer. I cannot emphasize the tragedy that has unfolded in long-term care. And yet, if you ask any experts in the field, they'll tell you that the situation prior to COVID-19 was at the breaking point and that it's only gotten worse. But the good news is this: we know exactly what needs to be done. There's very broad expert consensus. We need dedicated long-term care funding, increased staffing, infrastructure development and improved infection control measures, and a national adult vaccination strategy. So yes, we need national standards, but we need to make sure that we're working beyond the accreditation level with provincial and territorial governments to embed standards and regulation and include innovation and age tech and digital advances in seniors care as part of that. We need to fix the buildings. We need to provide transformative investment in long-term care. We saw the outcomes overwhelmingly worse in older homes. And we know that HVAC systems in many cases, including in Ontario, don't even live up to 1999 standards. We know, and my colleague will speak more about this, that we need to fix staffing and the conditions of work, that the conditions of work are the conditions of care. And we need an aging sector health and human resources strategy at a federal level. We should be training, incentives, programming, and putting immigration priorities at work. We know that most people, overwhelmingly 92% of seniors, will always age at home, and we need to do much more by having a federally supported home and community care strategy. And we need a national adult vaccination strategy. Right now, only about 3 to 10% of Canadian seniors have the basic vaccines that they need. So we need to make sure that we are moving forward and building on the successes of the senior-specific flu vaccines for long-term care and COVID. And lastly, and to conclude, I want to talk about social inclusion. I wanted to tell you about Manon, who's 85 and lives in Nova Scotia. She fell and broke a hip a year ago, stopping her from driving and getting around. When we talked to Manon, she told us that she'd not seen or spoken to anyone in more than a month. She was depressed, disconnected, and lonely. And this story is really common. A StatsCan report found that 20% of seniors didn't have a single person to reach out to in an emergency. And to conclude, we recommend the following 3 things: to increase investment in community-based programming for seniors, including intergenerational programming and activities, to invest in sector supports for digital inclusion and innovation, and last, to create a federal office of the seniors advocate to consistently include older people and plan for an aging population. Thank you. Those are my remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Damblin-Watts. And next, we're going to hear from the Canadian Support Workers Association. Ms. Ferrier, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me here today. As was just said, I'm Miranda Ferrier. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Support Workers Association. We represent over 67,000 personal support workers and support workers, as they're named different almost in every province across our wonderful nation. Seniors and disabled Canadians in Canada have never been at greater risk to their overall safety, both financially and societally. These risks are unusual in that they transcend both socioeconomic and cultural classes. Across Canada, our ability to provide care to this demographic has come into question as the most vulnerable members of our society are made to bear the burden of years of collective mismanagement. This absence of foresight can best be seen in the inability of our nation to adequately staff personal support workers who provide the basic needs for these vulnerable Canadians. Personal support workers are often the main point of contact for these individuals and are responsible for their care and emotional and societal supports. However, these relationships are precarious at best and at worst, criminal. Most of us hope for a long and rich life. However, many of us may think twice on this wish based on the reality of life for thousands of seniors and disabled Canadians in this country who are dependent on personal care. Seniors and disabled Canadians in long-term care and community care often experience traumatic levels of isolation, which quickly erode both independence and quality of life. As we all journey towards our senior years, our needs will grow more complex and require a robust and stable workforce. Unless we make significant changes and work towards a national standards model, many of us will not have the personal support workers needed to help us participate fully in our lives. Seniors and disabled Canadians and healthcare issues are often discussed in tandem, and the reasons are not hard to see why. For many seniors and disabled Canadians, it is their own health issues which isolate them, often leading to depression and many other health issues. In other words, as these seniors, disabled Canadians become lonely, their exposure to physically, emotionally, verbal, sexual, racial, and financial abuses increase greatly. Of all of the possible abuses endured by this vulnerable population, one not often spoken of is financial abuse. Over the last 3 years, the Canadian Support Workers Association, along with our chapter in Ontario, the Ontario Personal Support Workers Association, have dealt with a growing number of incidents involving the attempted seizure of entire estates by these healthcare workers. Without a professionalized healthcare workforce, especially in community care, this population is at serious risk of quickly having their financial assets stolen, mortgaged, and spent. I look forward to answering all your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferrier. And we're going to proceed with rounds of questions now, beginning with the Conservatives. Ms. Falk, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Laura and Miranda for both coming today and sharing your wisdom and your experience with the committee. I'm going to start with Miranda first, if that's okay. You know, in advance of Ontario's Personal Support Workers Day, which is next week on May 9th, I just want to first of all extend my gratitude and thanks to you and through you to support workers across the country for their dedicated and tireless work to care for their patients. We know that support workers have shown courage and commitment on the front lines throughout this pandemic. And I know that the work that support workers do is not easy, and it takes a certain skill set. It's emotionally, physically, and mentally demanding, and undoubtedly even more so during this health crisis. I'm just wondering, Miranda, if you can share with the committee the level of professional recognition that support workers have across the country, but how this affects the workers and their patients.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, MPP Falk. Nice to see you. So personal support workers across our nation, they're called something almost different in every single province. Nova Scotia, they're referred to as continuing care assistants. New Brunswick, they're PSWs and healthcare aides. Saskatchewan, continuing care assistants. In Ontario, we're personal support workers. So I'm just referred to them as PSWs moving forward. In every single province, we are unregulated. Now, there are 2 provinces that do have registries in place for their workers, but they're employer-driven registries, which actually does nothing for the worker in itself. One thing that the association has been doing on a provincial level in Ontario for over the past 10 years is we have been lobbying quite hard for regulation of the personal support workers. We know that with title protection and regulations and accountability and oversight put in place, not only would our most vulnerable be much safer, because right now, let's be honest, do you know who's knocking at your door? We don't know who actually is a personal support worker. There's no way other than with our association for them to identify themselves as such. And that's a huge concern. The level of abuse, elder care, right now what's happening, and this has been happening forever, a personal support worker working in long-term care or home care or retirement, wherever, they can get accused of abuse. They can leave that job, be fired from that job, go down and walk down the street and get a job at another long-term care facility or home care company or whatever, because no one's following them in their jobs. That is where this elder abuse really starts from. But I am happy to announce that the province of Ontario has put a bill forward to regulate the personal support workers in Ontario, and it's currently at its public consultation process, Bill 283, if anyone's interested in Ontario. And hopefully, and it'll be an authority that will oversee the accountability and public protections for the public over personal support workers. But PSWs, you know, being unregulated, we're not taken seriously in the job in a lot of places. We bring a lot to the table. No one else does personal care. Only the PSW does.
Yeah. One more quick question for you, Miranda. In previous meetings in this committee, the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion of Canada suggested that the Minister of Seniors and the Minister of Health is working with the sector to standardize credential for support workers. A follow-up from the department suggests that their work was to develop occupational standards. It was expected to begin this spring. I'm just wondering if the Canadian Support Workers Association has been consulted on occupational standards.
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Laura, if I may scoop over to you, I want to just first off the top as well, thank you for your steadfast advocacy that you have for an age-inclusive Canada. And with the breadth of CanAge's work, I know that you have valuable insights on a range of issues facing seniors and the impact that COVID-19 has had on seniors. And we know that the pandemic has been particularly isolating for seniors, and that seniors have missed out on celebrations, holidays, milestones, but even just that day-to-day contact, even if it's seeing somebody smile or holding a hand or sometimes just sitting beside someone. I'm just wondering if you can share with the committee this afternoon what impact social isolation has had on seniors, as well as the impact that restricted interactions have had during the pandemic.
Thank you for the question. It has been a misery for older people across this country, whether it be individuals left in their own homes and socially isolated from family and friends and neighbors, faith communities, exercise, and daily connections, or at the most extreme level, of course, in long-term care, like Stanley, who we spoke about, who was restricted not just to his long-term care facility, but to his room. Older people are suffering untold amounts of physical deterioration, which in long-term and residential care facilities, we've actually been able to measure. So we know that their bodies are getting less strong. We know that cognitive impairment has been significantly infected. So people who were more able mentally are now less able mentally. And that again can be measured on dementia scales or other forms of cognitive impairment. We know that mental health has deteriorated enormously. And for some people, particularly those in long-term care, where the average length of stay before they pass away is 18 months, this has been almost the rest of their lives. And so it has been devastating.
Okay. Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Templin-Watts. Thank you, Ms. Falk. Next, Mr. Dong, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon to Miranda and Laura. First of all, I want to say thank you for taking time out of a busy schedule, responding to the invitation of the committee. And also thank you for all your members' hard work during the pandemic. I have 6 long-term care facilities in my riding, Don Valley North. I visited them quite a few times through organizing PPE donations. I've seen firsthand how hard they work. And they are treating the residents as a member of their family. And that's the reason why most of them are willing to put their safety on the line to provide the support for them. So thank you. Through you, thank all your members and your colleagues for doing that. But having said that, reading the most recent report provided by Canadian military, I got really upset, to be honest, that the lives were lost purely due to neglect. I couldn't imagine this kind of stuff would happen in our country. And also thinking back some of the reports about since 2018, the random checks on long-term care facility has been suspended, and that kind of feeds into the really terrible picture right now. And on that note, I think that's part of the reason why that we've heard a lot of calling on federal government's increased involvement in the long-term care sector. We've seen that in the throne speech, we talked about looking to perhaps more severe penalty for perpetrators. We've seen in the budget the $3 billion investment over 5 years, but which leads to a bigger question, which is my first question for both of you. What's your suggestion on how all levels of government can work together, respecting each other's jurisdiction? And I heard my colleague mention occupational standard, which traditionally believe is a provincial responsibility. And obviously, there will be a lot of negotiation between the federal government and the province. So what's your vision, how all these 3 levels of government can work together to improve the situation?
Thank you for the question. Of course, our division of powers was not meant to promote finger pointing. It was meant to make sure that governments work together. In this particular shared area, we're very pleased to see the federal government reach in with open arms and make profound changes and make significant investments in this area, but we need to do more. For disclosure, I am part of the National Long-Term Care Standards Technical Working Group, and I know that these members will hear from the leaders of those technical working groups next. From a legal point of view, this is where the lawyer comes out, where we feel that it may be very helpful is to move forward with standards, but then work collaboratively with our provincial and territorial counterparts to embed those standards in regulation. Our organization, CanAge, would like to see funds tethered to those national standards. The $3 billion over 5 years across this country are a good and significant movement and signal about the importance of implementing national standards, but it's not transformative money. So we need to make sure that there are specific amounts of money tied to those standards. It will be an agreement between provinces and territories. We hope very strongly that provinces won't look at this as a political football and an opportunity for grandstanding, but rather an opportunity for transformative change.
So not a giant envelope, perhaps a specific envelope of funding that targets. Okay.
Yeah.
And Miranda? Sorry.
I would have to agree with Laura. Laura and I are friends outside of this as well. So we see things eye to eye on a lot of different issues, which is great. I would agree on having the individual envelopes. I think one of the ways we really have to look at this from federally looking down into the provinces is one area, especially in Ontario, that they just won't touch is ratios in long-term care. Right. Now, this might not play into what you're asking, but I worked as a personal support worker for 8 years in long-term care. So my background is all personal support worker, home care, long-term care, hospital. And I will tell you that from 2006 forward, I never worked a fully staffed shift. And that was in 2006 moving forward. So that's scary if you think back that far. I find that provinces are almost leery of setting set ratios. So if you have one PSW to 8 residents on a floor just to start with, and then decrease it as it moves on, that would make such a huge impact. The burnout rates would go down. You'd be able to actually give the residents better care. And so I think a ratio, the federal government could be really influential in that aspect.
Got it. I just tried to get one more question. Speaking of the standards, there are 2 things that are being considered: the National Long-Term Care Service Standard and also a new national standard focus on the operation and infection prevention. Is there a role for the federal government to ensure long-term care workers are given adequate training, work condition, and wages? Is there a federal role?
Very briefly, yes. And I don't want to speak over Miranda, yes, but we feel that there's an opportunity for incentivized grants, training and education supports, and immigration as well, with immigration priorities in these areas, as well as setting out different incentivized-based capacity building programs.
Miranda?
Totally agreed. Nothing to add.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Mr. Dong. Suite, Madame Chabat pour 6 minutes.
Madame Chabat, 6 minutes, please. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I was on mute. So thanks to our witnesses. Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimonies and also for your vision. You know that we are beginning together with you today a major study. A study on seniors, yes, but on all dimensions: financial, health, social, all of these considerations. I think that we are unanimous, at least here around the table, to say that the pandemic crisis that we are experiencing has really been particularly difficult for the most vulnerable in our society, including our seniors. I listened to what you had to say, and so I have a question for both of you. You've said a lot about what's being experienced in certain provinces, but perhaps there's something else I'd like to raise in terms of national standards, that you seem to be in agreement about these and you seem to be emphasizing this. You know that the whole issue of training of staff, at least in Quebec, training of personal care workers is something that leads to accreditation, and there's a lot of attention given to it, the whole issue of staff ratios. I think we have legislation, and it seems to me that wall-to-wall standards to try to put this in all of our systems of care in the whole province would be overdone to me. It seems to be too much. Even in Quebec, the vision of the Legislative Assembly was not really about national standards because we have a lot of standards. The focus was more that the Canadian provinces need sustainable, long-term, structured, sufficient healthcare funding. And therefore, all of the Canadian provinces and territories were demanding a substantial increase in Canadian transfer payments for health to meet these needs. Do you agree with this demand on the part of the provinces?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question.
Quebec, in many ways, has been in advance of other provinces and have better integrated community and long-term care. And when it had such challenges in the first wave, took dramatic steps, particularly in hiring over the summer, that has shown leadership. However, when we're thinking about national standards, we're also thinking about things like the built environment, HVAC systems, air conditioning systems, how big a space is. And those are not particular items that we can leave up to people coming up with these ideas themselves in the same way that building codes exist for a reason. And so it's, I think, important that we think about making sure that we're leveling up all provinces to have a good understanding about how the built environment and how standards of care need to be at a minimum. It doesn't mean that Quebec can't exceed that. We have seen, however, that where health transfers have gone to provinces untethered, and I'll use the example of home care in 2017, that the money has simply disappeared into provincial treasury and haven't necessarily been applied for the purposes that they need. I think that we are on a transformative step, and we can learn from our Quebec colleagues for how well care has been delivered in the second and third waves. But Quebec care is a piece that is quite different than we can see sometimes in other jurisdictions. I think this is a moment of transformative change, and we need to make sure that all provinces, private, public, and not-for-profit homes have the information and budgetary knowledge to know what we need to do forward. And so I think it's going to be critically important that we do draw out these standards, not to restrain innovation, but to promote it.
I would definitely have to agree with Laura. Congratulations on the great hiring initiative that was done last summer. It actually pushed Ontario to do that as well. So good on being the first one. I think that, there's a lot more flexibility, it seems like, in Quebec than there is in many other provinces in relation to ratios. You guys have really high standards in that way, and we all need to learn from that. But I think that every single province needs to be held to account. And we also do need to know where the money goes when it goes into the provinces. I'm done. Thank you.
Can I continue? I haven't been timing myself. Thanks to both of you for your answers. I have to say this, and I think you already know, that whatever province we're talking about, most of the healthcare spending costs is in staffing. 80% of the costs of our healthcare system, I would say even our social service system, is the cost of staffing. So when you talk about standards, we have a vision, I don't know if you share it, that you need arms, you need staff to be able to support what you're saying, whether it's to improve our infrastructure or whether it's HVAC in Quebec or air conditioning. And that's part of the debate. That's in Quebec. Those are choices. And we're looking into it. But to be able to appropriately support a healthcare system, our vision is that the federal government has abandoned the provinces because the costs of the healthcare system have, instead of providing appropriate funding, the funding has been reduced over time. So it's hard for me to understand how standards would resolve anything that's much more structural. that ought to be resolved. Thank you, Madame Chabot.
Next, Ms. Gazan, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank both Laura and Miranda for your testimony. I find it abhorrent how seniors in this country are treated, and the fact that so many seniors live in poverty, in fact, in this country, which is why I have been pushing for a guaranteed livable basic income. And the fact that I know the current government has announced increasing OAS rates when seniors are 75, that's unacceptable to me. That should occur way before that, to make sure that all seniors in this country can live in dignity, something clearly through your testimony has confirmed is not happening. So I just wanted to expand on some of your comments. My first one is with Laura. In your testimony, you mentioned the need for a federal seniors advocate. Could you expand a little bit on that?
In comparator countries, we have seen that having a federal seniors advocate has allowed a nation to plan. It can make sure that we are thinking about how our aging population has needs to be met and can hold account the departments and making sure that the mechanisms and budgets are being allocated appropriately. We see this as well in a variety of provinces, and where those provinces have had seniors advocates, we have seen the conditions of care and support increase as well, that older adults have a voice for well-being, and that governments have a resource to ensure that they're moving towards both an age-inclusive Canada on a social and economic basis. It is not an expensive proposition, and it is something that Canada should have. We have long needed a seniors advocate. We have long needed a national seniors strategy, which is why CanAge wrote that the Voices of Canada Seniors are roadmap to an age-inclusive Canada. There is broad agreement that a federal seniors advocate would be both a cost-effective and small move that would have a large impact.
And I think just from the testimony that you provided, Laura, it's very clear to me that there needs to be an advocate in place to make sure there's somebody that can fight for seniors who are not being treated with dignity or respect, or being provided with the resources they need. So thank you so much for that. My next question is for you, Miranda. We know that across sectors, unionized workplaces provide better conditions for workers. So I know, for example, in long-term care in Manitoba, certainly in my riding of Winnipeg Centre, many of the care workers come from racialized communities. Many, in fact, from the Filipino community, who provide frontline services, who have put their lives on the line and, in fact, lost their lives caring for others. Can you speak about how increased unionization for support workers will help enable better conditions for support workers as well as for seniors in long-term care?
I think I can really speak to, and thank you for saying that, by the way. We've lost a lot of support workers across our nation due to COVID-19 who did step up to the plate when everyone else stepped back. So thank you for that recognition. I think unionized workplaces, I know most long-term care facilities across our nation are unionized. It's just the way it rock and rolls in that area for them. And we find that it's actually it's good, but it's also not good. We find there's work that needs to be done there as well. If you have a unionized workplace, you have a seniority. The issue with unionized workplaces is the list of seniorities. So if you are a personal support worker that is working in long-term care and you're only part-time casual and you work all the hours that they want you to work and you go in all the time, and a line finally comes up that you can get a full-time position, but someone who's been there for 9 years ahead of you who wants this position, who never takes the call-ins, always just works their hours and goes home and never does the extra. The person that's been there 9 years will get that full-time position over, the other PSW who puts her heart and soul into it. So seniority has come up as an issue with unionization, but I will say it gives the workers a voice, and it gives them that protection, especially against management. or administration in long-term care homes, where there seems to be a lot of butting heads, shall I say, where management likes to bully the frontline staff, and that is an issue. So that's where unions do step in, and they are excellent for the workers.
Just very briefly, I know I have less than a minute left, and I'm very interested. More comments around national standards in long-term care, maybe for Laura, and then I have a last question. I had about 30 minutes of questions. I'm very so I'm like, what do I ask? Okay, Laura.
We think national standards are not the only solution, and they need to be backed by supports embedded in law and money and investment. But they will provide, I think, a clear minimum set of standards across this country, and they help to obviate some of that concerns that we have around public versus private long-term care, which is a bigger debate. At least if we can get the care standards up to an equitable level, some of those concerns can be obviated.
Thank you,
you.
Ms. Kazan. Next, Ms. Donachow, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. Ms. Watts, I wanted to pick up on something you shared with my colleague, Ms. Falk. I just sort of paraphrased your quote here, but she was asking you about the impacts of isolation on seniors, and very bluntly, you'd said it has been misery, and that older people are suffering from untold amounts of physical deterioration, cognitive impairment, they're less able mentally. You went on to say mental health has deteriorated enormously as a result of isolation. And I just wanted you to expand a bit on that in reference to some of the research you have done for your pre-budget submission. I'll just quote it first. In your pre-budget submission, you mentioned consequences of isolation, loneliness, and ageism significantly decrease life expectancy, cognitive function, physical well-being, mental health, and quality of life. It went on to say that social isolation can be as harmful to a person's health as smoking, obesity, and hypertension. So, yeah, most of the research I found, though, was from before the pandemic. So could you elaborate for the committee how you feel that this the research that I just mentioned has even been heightened with the tremendous amount of isolation seniors have been experiencing over the past 14 months?
Prior to COVID-19, we saw that social isolation could take up to 8 years off of the life expectancy of an older person. Prior to COVID-19, we have seen untold levels of social isolation. Active, healthy 75-year-olds now locked in their homes, unable to see family and friend, has had profound problems with physical ability to move around. These are people who previously did not have disabilities, either physical or mental disabilities, but now are suffering enormously. We're starting to see some of the research in the community, but we are already seeing some of the research coming out of long-term and residential type care. The CIHI report did some reviews, as well as Dr. Nathan Stahl has done some occupational therapy reviews, have been also considered. We saw some of the outcomes in the Maples in Winnipeg, which were referred to as well, and across the country. So we are able to measure the fact that people are not able to toilet anymore, not able to walk as far anymore, not able to understand and appreciate or feed themselves as well. So these are real physical, mental engagements. And then we think on top of that, the disconnection and the trauma have now pulled people into mental health spheres that we have not ever seen before in the same level. So the loneliness and self-isolation, up to 15 cigarettes a day is how bad it was prior to COVID-19. Now imagine we are all chain smoking.
Oh, wow. That's really incredible and shocking and very disturbing statistics. But I appreciate you sharing them for the committee. They're critical for the research that we are doing in this study. Just on a personal anecdote, I do have a very dear mentor and friend of mine. Her mother is elderly and in a care home and has dementia. And so she is the one person, even though they have a large family, she's the one person that's allowed to go see her. But when she goes see her, of course, precautions must be taken. So she has her mask and her shield. And her mother is already quite confused at that stage. And she's not even allowed to touch her mother. mother. She's not allowed to help her go to the bathroom or really any of those supports that caregivers are allowed to provide. And when she told me this story, she was very emotional, obviously, as the daughter of her mother. She can't even hug her. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations, in the next number of years, if we have to live with the pandemic, of how we can better support seniors, particularly in that sort of situation, and have their family perhaps support them. I don't know. I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a seniors expert, but I'm just wondering what your perspective is there anything more that we can be doing to sort of help women and men in that situation?
One of the reasons that we put forward the recommendation for a national adult vaccination strategy is we let epidemics come through seniors every single year in the community and in long-term care and do very little for it. It's so simple to vaccinate, but we leave up to provinces and local health units to order the senior-specific flu vaccine, the pneumonia vaccine, the shingles vaccine. This time we saw the federal government step up and actually purchase and distribute the senior-specific flu vaccine to long-term care, and that was transformative. We can do small steps like that on an ongoing basis, and that will reduce these yearly epidemics and hopefully the pandemics to make sure that we are never in some of these circumstances again. So that's a very tangible thing to do. And the other piece of it I would offer is once people are vaccinated for COVID-19, we need to loosen these restrictions. They are now being stuck because of concern around liability and concern around insurance, and violation of seniors' rights are happening all across this country. So there's no reason, if the mom is still vaccinated with 2 vaccines and precautions are in place, that she shouldn't get a hug and a walk outside.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nacho. Next, Mr. Long, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to my colleagues, and good afternoon to Ms. Tamblin and Ferrier. Thank you very much for your presentations. Ms. Tamblin, obviously you're right across, as we talked about earlier, right across the Bay of Fundy there. I could almost see you in a clear day. So it's great that you're both here. And look, I mean, there's no question that this is an incredibly important study. One of the things that was really would break my heart when I was doing door-to-door back in 2015 at my first campaign was, going out and seeing seniors in their homes and how seniors were so vulnerable and seniors were forgotten. And, you roll that into, what's happened, certainly, during this pandemic, the isolation and just the travesty that it's had on all Canadians, but in particular seniors. And, certainly from our government standpoint, as MPs, we're always lobbying and making sure we do the right things. And, it goes without saying that we did certainly raise the GIS to 10% for low income single seniors. And we did roll back the 67-year-old increase that the Harper government was going to bring for the age of eligibility for benefits back to 65. And I'm thrilled, certainly in this budget, that, we are increasing the OAS for seniors 75 years and older. And sure, there's people that would ask a question, well, why not 64, 65 to 74? But, we certainly deem that 75 and up seniors are certainly more vulnerable, have more healthcare costs. So I'm certainly thrilled that our government is moving forward with those initiatives. And look, I'm in a province here that, we have more people over 55 years of age than under 15. And I know there was a study in 2018 that came out and said that, in our country now, 1 of 2 Canadians is over 40 years of age. So, it's a pressing problem. It's a challenging program. I wanted to talk about basically, obviously, home care for seniors, but also kind of roll that into, if I said NORC, or do you know what I mean? Obviously, a naturally occurring retirement community. And, these are communities that are obviously popping up. There's these communities that are forming. They're not really even forming deliberately, if you will, or, they're not designed that way, but, it's 55 or older, over 40% of the people, so on and so forth. And I read an interesting article the other day that was talking about really a concept of, we need to get better as government. And, we recognize I know MP Dong talked about the levels of government and how we need to cooperate better. But the article I read basically said, we could do a lot better job also bringing more services to seniors in these communities. And, obviously that rolls into, home care, and we're going to talk about specific home care. But I'll start with you, Ms. Tamlin. Can you just talk about, alternative types of care, which would be bringing more care to seniors in their communities? Thank you.
Aging in place and making age-inclusive communities has to be our priority. Yes, we will always need long-term care because as we live longer and are more fragile, there will always be some people who need 24 hours of nursing care. But about 20% of the people in long-term care could move home if services came to them. And whether those services are shared amongst a community, like a naturally occurring retirement community or not, depends on what are the needs of that community. But services to people in place is absolutely where we need to focus on as a key priority in government.
Can you give me any examples of a gold standard or a community or a province that has something like that that's working?
We have NORCs that are very well established in a network across this country, and I can provide the House with more detailed information about an entire association of naturally occurring retirement communities, where they live, how they work, and what the best standards are as a follow-up piece of information.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ferrier, could you comment on that if you can quickly?
Quickly, I can just say that there is many good ways to bring all of the help that they need into one community. Home care is easier, believe it or not, to organize at times than long-term care. So it's much more doable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Suite Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demi.
And now over to Madame Chabot for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I would like to talk about the financial security of seniors, direct assistance that our seniors need. I see that you have commented on the budget. I'm addressing Miranda more specifically. You were talking about the federal budget and the issue of increasing old age pension. You know that the old age security is from 65 and up, independent of your status previous to this. We'd like to know what your opinion is about this in terms of what the government is proposing to do to increase old age security only at 75 and in starting in 2022 only. Don't you think it should be beginning at 65?
I'm going to have to agree and say I do agree that it should start at 65. I have parents that heavily rely upon that. But, I think we need to just not look at that. We need to look at what else we can give to seniors. I know that many seniors struggle with paying for their food. They struggle for paying for their rent. They don't have a place to live. They move back in with family. I think we're going to see more struggles if that age is moved up. Thank you.
Madame Laura?
Madame Laura?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you.
Is to see the increase at 75. It is a very long time coming. We think that these increases should be broadly brought up to standards of seniors' poverty, and that there needs to be support for those most at need. So differentiating between what everybody gets and those who are particularly in need as well.
Do I have any time left? Yes, for a brief comment if you'd like, perhaps 30 seconds. Well, a last comment then. I'm trying to understand the distinction between financial vulnerability of seniors between 65 and 75 years of age. Thank you, Madame Chabot. Ms. Gazan?
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Laura and Miranda for speaking about the importance of independence and having the choice to stay at home. I think everybody on this committee would agree that they value their independence. And when we get to that point in life, would like the option to choose between long-term care and home. I say that as well for members of the disabled community who should also be granted those life options. During the second wave, we saw devastating levels of infection and death in long-term care homes, notably for-profit care homes. And in fact, we know that, as you know, that 80% of the COVID-19 deaths in Canada have been attributed to long-term care homes. We knew we had problems before the pandemic. We just didn't deal with it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. Just putting that out there. This is not a new problem. And we also saw in long-term care homes that the worst outbreaks were more often than in not-for-profit care homes. We know that. So my question for either one of you, can you speak about why it is important to take profit out of long-term care and how that would result, in fact, in better care for seniors across the country and treatment of workers as well?
I can answer this. I don't know if I'm going to give you the answer you want to hear, but I can answer this quite quickly. Having worked in both for-profit and not-for-profit and representing personal support workers in both sectors across our nation, I will have to say that both sides have issues. Yes, the for-profit side definitely had more infections, massively more infections rate than the not-for-profit. But when it comes to the treatment of staff, when it comes to the treatment of residents, we see issues on both sides of the coin. However, when you talk about supplies, where it be incontinence products, extra time, extra outings, etc., not-for-profit is the winner of that one. So I think we need to pick good parts from both sides, and then we'll know exactly what we need to do in order to fix our system.
So just picking up on that, I appreciate your feedback on that. Would you then agree that, because you've indicated there's been issues in both, I would say we have an issue with how we treat seniors, period, in this country on all fronts. Would you say that this makes it even more critical to put in place national standards and very clear regulations for long-term care homes to ensure that seniors are provided with adequate care?
Yes, I would agree. I can hand that over to Laura.
I would agree as well. In 1987, when we created the Canada Health Act, we only lived till 76.4 years. We didn't really have long-term care. I think if we designed it then thinking forwards, and if we had a seniors advocate to say we need to be thinking about these things, we would never have done anything but not-for-profit care. It would have been part of our Health Act. We are not there. 50% of our long-term care is being provided privately. And I don't see a pragmatic way of easily undoing that while trying to meet the needs of a growing and less able population at the end of life. And so national standards are going to be critical to make sure that we don't have the problems that we have had any longer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Tucker, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to go back a little bit. It was touched on some of the pressures that seniors are facing, especially with inflation and everything costing, unfortunately, more, and everyone's bracing for what will come after this pandemic, which I fear will put more strain on seniors and our loved ones. And along that vein of hopefully finding efficiencies within our providing of care, I thought one of the ideas that came in with your written submission for the budget in 2021 was the proposal to create a national 1-800 toll-free line that would help seniors to get care and to, unfortunately, bring to light some of the abuses that are taking place out there. And it just got me a little thinking on how do we make the system more efficient for seniors, and maybe when you're that submission with if we can get seniors in contact with people that are there whose role is to help, we could actually have better outcomes. So just to unpack that idea a little bit more on a 1-800 number for supports. And a second up question I can follow up later, but could it be piggybacked to the 211 system, which is for citizens to have access information on where to find help?
A 1-800 number is a simple solution, and it's already being run by the National Anti-Fraud Center. So that existing resource could have its mandate expanded. In fact, the National Anti-Fraud Center has been quite open to this conversation for some time. Really, people call and they need to know who to turn to with some expertise in each province and territory. If they call from Shediac, they need to know what's happening in New Brunswick. If they call from Kamloops, they need to know what's happening in British Columbia. The systems and frameworks are so diverse across the country, but people are desperate to find the resources that are regional. We're not suggesting that the federal government do all these things, but a basic 1-800 line staffed with people who actually can help with navigation would make a huge difference. This has been tried in other jurisdictions, in Australia, in New Zealand, even in the United States, and has been a very simple and effective tool. It's not going to solve everything, but it can take some of that desperation away.
Absolutely. And just to unpack this a little bit more, Laura, you talked about, I believe the individual's name was Stanley, got in contact with you. Was it through one of these support lines, or how did that conversation reach to you?
Standy called us at CanAge, and our phone numbers are available and our email is available. And we have people who are reaching out to all kinds of services. 211 is a good service. It's, of course, being rolled across the country now. It works better in some places and not as well as others. So it is another type of resource that can be helpful. But people need to actually be trained. 211 is information and referral. And what we see, and I'll use an example in Ontario just because this one came from 211, that when the calls on elder abuse and neglect hit 211, they were flooded, and 211 doesn't have training on it. So then they hand you over to the senior safety line. Well, just to give you a sense, they were getting 800 calls every 3 days in the senior safety line during COVID-19 with an 85% drop rate. That means only 15% of the calls were getting through, and that was 24 hours a day. So 211 is a way in, but it has to go to someone specialized. So we think that yes, 211 and other supports are important points, but to have a national response line around seniors inquiries, which could either be staffed by Service Canada or it could be staffed through the National Anti-Fraud Center or an analogous line with expert resources to help, is really a useful tool.
And speaking on the fraud, I had a couple of questions along on how we can reduce it. And the one proposal was to have a trusted advisor that banks would have to ask for. And along those lines, I brought up some other questions though about some of the financial abuse and fraud that takes place as unfortunately other trusted individuals. And how would we protect against an effort to reduce fraud that could actually make it more common?
One of the key things that can be done by the federal government is to fix the poor wording in Section 7 sub 3 of PIPEDA, which makes reporting of financial abuse very, very challenging. And again, I can provide additional information to the committee if it likes. The CSA, IROC, MFDA, and the Canadian Bankers Association are all moving to install trusted contact people as part of the Know Your Client principles. And so that is a good and useful way that the regulatory system is moving forward. What the federal government needs to do is tweak the language in PIPEDA, and we've made submissions. It's a very easy fix, but will allow reporting to be much more effective for financial institutions.
Absolutely. And if you would submit to that committee, I thank you again for your submission, and thank you for your public service and helping seniors.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. And the last question round of this panel will be Mr. Lauzon pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lauzon, for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank Ms. Laura and Ms. Miranda for your appearances here today and your very important testimony. Ms. Laura, you've piqued my curiosity because you were talking just before about the importance of organizations who could provide assistance to seniors. You know that we've invested another $20 million in the New Horizons program, The idea being to set up projects to assist elders, and also $350 million for nonprofit and organizations during the pandemic, and $9 million with United Way, as well as millions of dollars to food banks. Do you think that we have taken the right steps, and what else could we do other than what we've done to be helpful through these organizations or other organizations in order to help our Canadian seniors?
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you for the questions.
We have taken some steps forward, but if we compare, for instance, the money that was given to domestic violence, so $350 million off the bat, and then followed by another $157 million for domestic violence, and $0 on elder abuse and neglect, we see a stark difference between how government responses have been thinking about older people. Again, we think a federal seniors advocate would have supported government in understanding that resources around things like abuse and neglect were going to be critically important. We do thank the government for its investments, and we think the work with United Way was critically important in particular. Where the challenge has ever been with New Horizons, and I've been very involved with the New Horizons for Seniors program for more than 20 years, is that they tend to be 1 year only, with a rare exception of a few multi-year programs, 1 year only, and predominantly pilot-based and need to show sustainability. The New Horizons for Seniors program has been up for review many times, and the review process is always the same. Make it more easy for renewable funding, make it always a 1 year program, elevate that $25,000 to a more meaningful level, or at least allow 3-year programming up to $75,000 so communities can provide supports. We know austerity is coming, and we know that the first thing that gets cut are seniors programs. And certainly this is going to be a matter that we need to institutionalize supports for seniors and not make just one-time payments. The last thing I would offer is it was excellent to see that $500 payment, and then again a bit of a support next year as well to support older people directly for elevated expenses they had. But if you compare that one-time support to ongoing monthly support for children and youth in need, women in need, and other SERBs, we see there that really an answer is more of a universal basic income answer rather than a one-time cost. Older people have dramatically more expenses in terms of delivery, in terms of transportation, and in terms of different types of medical care during COVID-19. So I think it would be helpful to think about how on an ongoing basis, older people can be supported with elevated costs caused by COVID-19.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour votre réponse.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think the question could be asked of both of you. Perhaps, Miranda, you could start by answering that question. You said earlier that in terms of why pension is starting from age 75, do you agree with us that what's important is to target the people who are the most vulnerable, and that starting at age 75, we know that half of our seniors have some form of disability or impairment? And imagine that you've reached that level, that age, and half of them have a serious impairment. Sometimes they can't stay at home. 57% of these cases are women. 4 out of 10 are widows. So if we're looking at incomes, 50% of them have less than $30,000 a year in income. So the reason for a responsible government to take concrete steps from age 75, I mean, based on the statistics, do you think that this is the right decision that the government made to help people age 75 and up instead of giving less to everybody, or even not give any to the people who are rich when they're 65?
I'll answer really quickly. I do agree with what the government did by only focusing on those that truly do need the help. I think that's of great importance. However, I'm concerned about those that may just be under the threshold or just above the threshold of what the government entails as struggling from the age of 65 up. That is my only concern, is what that threshold is going to be and how we can ensure that they're all taken care of at the end of the day.
Merci, Monsieur Lauzon.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon.
concludes this panel. To Ms. Tamblin-Watts and Ms. Ferrier, you may have heard at the start that I said that this was meeting number 34. I don't think I have ever said this. You made my job easy today. Your answers were concise, but extremely well thought out and informative. We're off to a very good start on this study. Thanks to you. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in support of our seniors and those who care for them, and for your testimony here today. It is greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Merci à tout le monde.
Thank you, everybody.
Colleagues, we're now going to suspend while we do while we get ready for the second panel. So we stand suspended. Today's meeting is on our study of the impact of COVID-19 on seniors. A few comments for the benefit of our witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on your microphone icon to activate your mic. Interpretation is available in this video conference. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when not speaking, your mic should be on mute. I would like now to offer you a warm welcome to the committee to continue our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks followed by questions. We have with us today from AgeWell, Alex Mihalidis, the Scientific Director, and from the National Institute on Aging, Samir Sinha, the Director of Health Policy Research. We'll start with Mr. Mihalidis for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee, sir. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you, MP Casey and members of the committee. My name is Alex Mihalidis, and I am the Scientific Director and CEO of the AgeWell Network of Center of Excellence. I am also a professor at the University of Toronto, having specialized in the area of technology to support older adults for the past 20 years. AgeWell is Canada's technology and aging network. And during this pandemic, we have seen older adults and their caregivers stay resilient, like all Canadians, with the help of technology. All of us are wondering what the world will look like post-pandemic. We can say with certainty that technology will play a much larger role in the lives of older adults and caregivers. With the increase in the use of telehealth, it's not an exaggeration to say that technology is going to help transform the care older Canadians receive. We anticipate this across all settings: hospital, community, home, and long-term care, where the pandemic has resulted in devastating consequences. So the question is, are older adults receptive to technology? The answer is yes. A poll commissioned in July of 2020 by AgeWell shows that COVID-19 has significantly increased the use of many technologies among older Canadians. The poll surveyed over 2,000 Canadians aged 50 plus that are representative of our country's provinces and territories and use a mix of online and telephone surveys. More than 6 out of 10 Canadians aged 65 plus agree that technological advancements can help to lessen the impact of COVID-19 on their daily lives. The majority agree that technology can help them maintain relationships, reduce social isolation, pursue hobbies, manage all aspects of health, and stay safe, independent, and active as they age. These trends are what is driving a multi-trillion-dollar age tech market internationally, and Canadians are no different. The majority of those aged 50 plus, which includes the future generation of seniors, are willing to pay out of pocket for technology that allows them to stay at home as they age. Many cutting-edge technologies that benefit older adults are in development and some are on the market. At AgeWell, the backbone of Canada's age tech sector, research teams and startups have over 100 technology-based solutions in the pipeline or already making a difference in people's lives, including during the pandemic. So what is age tech? It is anything from glasses on your face to smart home systems to support aging in place, to mobile health apps and platforms designed to enhance safety and quality of life for residents in long-term care. I want to emphasize that the timeline for implementing such solutions has moved up dramatically because of COVID-19. People want these technologies now. Even after the pandemic passes, these innovations will be needed to enable people to live longer in their own homes and to ease the increasing pressures on the healthcare system. AgeWell is actively working with long-term care providers, such as with the City of Toronto and elsewhere, to determine the technology needs and to implement solutions today. Here are 3 ways in which we can accelerate the delivery timeline. First, the Canadian government needs to increase investment in Canada's age tech startups so that products get into the people's hands sooner. Canada's gross domestic expenditures on research and development as a percentage of GDP has declined almost 16% over the past 10 years, while other OECD countries grew by approximately 10%. We need to change the storyline in order to continue being an international leader in the age tech space. Second, we need to accelerate equitable access to broadband internet, which is often a challenge in rural and Indigenous communities. In our modern society, and in a country like Canada, access needs to be considered a basic right. In long-term care and seniors residences, Wi-Fi must just be available. Finally, supporting clinicians to integrate apps and other new technology into their clinical practices is key for transforming Canada's healthcare systems. The federal government can play a role in this by earmarking funds for assistive technologies that help with low vision, hearing, cognition, and social inclusion, which are critically important for seniors. As a Canadian organization driving forward Canada's age tech sector, AgeWell will continue to work with key partners in industry, government, and community groups to guide and increase the impact of homegrown innovations. Seniors and caregivers, whose involvement is essential, will be with us every step of the way to ensure that emerging technologies are practical and will be adopted now and post-pandemic. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you, and I welcome any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Mielides. Next, Dr. Sinha for 5 minutes. You have the floor. Welcome to the committee.
Thanks, Mr. Casey, and for members of the committee. I'm Dr. Samir Sinha, and I'm the Director of Health Policy Research at the National Institute on Aging. The NIA is a Ryerson-based think tank focused on addressing the realities of Canada's aging population. Additionally, I serve as the Director of Geriatrics at Sinai Health and the University Health Network, and was recently appointed as a member of the federal government's National Seniors Council and invited to chair the Health Standards Organizational Technical Committee that has been tasked with developing the new National Long-Term Care Services Standard for Canada. I first of all want to take a moment to acknowledge the 23,253 older Canadians, representing 95% of Canada's deaths thus far from COVID-19, as well as their families. There's a growing public discourse on the role of governments to address the inadequacies of our supports for older Canadians during the pandemic, and including in the provision of long-term care, and growing calls for the federal government's greater leadership in these areas. While other countries have acted clearly and decisively to develop stronger systems of long-term care as they've aged, Canada didn't. This inaction cumulatively helped to sow the seeds of this tragedy we've been witnessing, where 62% of Canada's deaths to date from COVID-19 have occurred in LTC settings, the highest rate of any G20 country. I publicly noted early on that while the LTC homes are becoming the epicenters of Canada's pandemic, there was no national mechanism in place to track these outbreaks in a consistent way. Neither PHAC nor CIHI were doing this. Our NIA thus took on the task to systematically collect all the data related to resident staff cases and deaths at the individual home level across Canada. And had we not done that, the truth of what happened in long-term care might have remained obscured. Our highly accurate record, developed with CIHI's support, has become the basis of many important studies and analyses. However, my point here is that something important like this should not have been left to the goodwill of provinces or a university research center, but should have been a clearly enabled function of the federal government's pandemic response. And moving forward, a clear protocol and systems need to be in place in future to ensure we never are caught off guard like this again. PHAC was helpful in coming up with some early guidance to help provinces and territories look at a more standard infection prevention and control measures and the treatment of COVID-19 cases in long-term care settings, but it's not clear why the agency could not have been enabled or supported to provide much needed guidance to provinces and territories to navigate other important challenges such as addressing the effects of social isolation and resident access to family members. It was our NIA on our own initiative that decided to lead on the creation of national LTC guidance. First, the release of our spring 2020 Iron Ring guidance, which continues to serve as evidence base around how provinces and territories should respond to COVID-19 in congregate care settings. We've now updated that 3 times. In July 2020, we released our Finding the Right Balance guidance document to support the reopening of Canadian long-term care homes to family caregivers and visitors. And now, with the majority of LTC residents and staff being vaccinated, the lack of guidance being issued, as the CDC has done in the United States, is forcing residents and families in homes across too many parts of the country to remain isolated from each other, and producing serious physical and mental health consequences. Again, the NIA is helping to develop new evidence-based guidance to enable our provinces and territories to safely reopen their homes, but it should be the official government bodies like PHAC leading this work. I'm glad that the federal government is now providing much needed leadership with the creation of new national standards for long-term care. Enabling this with $3 billion will also be helpful to ensure the provision of a more consistent and higher standard of care across Canada. And in being asked to chair HSO's technical committee, I'm thrilled to see an unprecedented level of public engagement in this work so far. In the future, our NIA research is showing that at least 430,000 Canadians have current unmet home care needs, while more than 40,000 are on the wait list for long-term care homes even before the pandemic. We need to do more to support Canadians to age well and in their homes for as long as possible. But our research shows that Canada spends 30% less than the average OECD country on the provision of long-term care, and close to 90% of our public LTC dollars on institutionalizing people rather than caring for them in their own homes where they want to be. Our NIA's Pandemic Perspectives reports that show that virtually 100% of older Canadians want to do everything possible to remain in their own homes for as long as possible. And our Bringing Long-Term Care Home report shows that this could be done well and for lower costs too for many people currently in our long-term care settings. Of course, people have the right to pay privately for their own home care services, but this is not an option for the majority of Canadians who don't have the financial resources to do so. The recent commitment to increase OAS payments for older Canadians 75 and older will enable some to better meet the growing costs associated with aging and aging in place, but we need to think bigger, as other countries have, perhaps by enabling the creation of a national long-term care insurance program or further improvements to the guaranteed income supplement program for lower income older Canadians. So where do we go from here? While it's good that most political leaders have agreed that long-term care is broken, we need to implement and ensure that we pair our immediate actions with efforts to determine how best to fix and fund the long-term care system that all Canadians should look forward to as we age. In this regard, I'm glad that our NIA has been helping to ensure we can define the issues properly, ask the right questions, find the right answers, and ways of implementing them as quickly as possible. Much of what we need to do has been well known for years and luckily isn't rocket science, but it'll take political will and a federal, provincial, and territorial coordination of efforts. We thus recommend that the federal government fully support the work ahead that will enable the creation of new national long-term care standards and help its provinces and territories in addressing these issues once and for all. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Dr. Sina. We're going to proceed now with rounds of questions, beginning with Ms. Falk, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both our witnesses for coming today and contributing to this committee's study. We know that with an aging population, we know that we need to ensure that there is a better continuum of housing and care needs for seniors in Canada. And there seems to be a consensus among older adults and seniors that they would prefer to age in place and live independently as long as possible. And I noted in the National Institute for Aging survey that was released last fall on pandemic perspectives, there was a significant number of Canadians who had indicated that COVID-19 has changed their opinion on whether they would arrange themselves to live in a nursing or retirement home. So given that we know this, given what we know, this change in perspective isn't surprising to many of us. So I'm interested to hear your perspective, Dr. Sinha. I know that you yourself had said early in the pandemic that if your mother was in long-term care, that you would have pulled her out. So do you think that change in perspective is permanent? And in addition to improving the standard of care in long-term care homes, which we know isn't going to be an easy task, what do governments need to do to prioritize to respond to that change in perspective?
Thank you very much for that question, Ms. Falk. That report that we put out last summer, for example, last fall, really spoke about that shifting perspective, that 60% of Canadians said that they were reconsidering whether they or a loved one would want to live in a retirement or a long-term care home in future. We followed up that report with another survey in partnership with the CMA that basically showed that now virtually 90% or more of Canadians, and especially closer to 100% as they age, will do everything possible to avoid going into a long-term care home. So I think over this pandemic, those views have been solidified more so than ever. And I think the challenge is that now I think most Canadians are well aware of the shortcomings and are really looking for change in the sector before they begin to trust it again. So I think, these perspectives are real. We have to understand them, but I think they can also galvanize an opportunity to not only improve the way we provide long-term care, but to also think about the value proposition of being able to provide more supports and services to help older Canadians to age in the places of their choice, which are often their home. As I mentioned earlier in my opening statement, close to 90% of our publicly funded long-term care dollars are spent about institutionalizing people in their own homes. Whereas if you look at other countries like Denmark, they're actually spending 2/3 of their publicly funded long-term care dollars to support people in their own homes, which can often be done cheaper without worrying about massive infrastructure costs and be done in a much more flexible way that can meet people where they're at when they need it most. So I think there's an opportunity here to re-examine how we provide that care. And again, what can the federal government's role be in something that for now has always been purely a provincial and territorial jurisdiction, but something that our federal government is currently in the recent health accord spending $6 billion to increase the provision of home and community care, and now $3 billion new dollars on top of $1 billion recently to try and improve the provision of long-term care across Canada as well.
Thank you for that. I think too, it is so important that seniors have autonomy. I think, there's in the past, there's been this is where you go. This is just how the continuum of life goes. And I think it's so important that different orders or levels of government, where applicable, do what they can so seniors can still have autonomy and choices in life. And I just want to follow up with age well. So, Alex, I'm just wondering if you have anything to add to that, in the sense of what role could the age tech sector play in helping seniors live independently?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And I fully concur with Dr. Sinha's remarks around the wanting of people to remain in their own homes. And even in our own survey related to that, we found that post-pandemic or during the pandemic, that only 48% of those who responded to our surveys said that they felt comfortable aging in Canada, and that number dropped from approximately 60% before the pandemic. Technology can play significant roles in keeping the autonomy of older people in the homes and communities. For example, we found that the number of older people that are now using social media to reach out to their friends and family social circles has raised up to approximately 1/3 of those that were surveyed. We're seeing an increase in the number of older people that are using online tools for online shopping. We even saw an increase in online dating among seniors with the pandemic as well. So we're starting to see these tools make their way into everyday use. And the one thing to consider as well is it's a new demographic of older people that's coming very quickly with the baby boomers, where technology is mostly already integrated into their daily lives, and this expectation is going to continue as they age.
Thank you. Mr. Sinha, Dr. Sinha, I have one quick question for you. Just given your background with geriatrics, I'm just wondering if you can supply the committee ideas of or what the solution is for addressing the shortages that is in geriatrics and also palliative care, because we do know with the debate on medical assistance in dying that happened in the House not long ago, members of Parliament noting the inadequate manpower that is in those areas.
It's an excellent question.
Briefly, if you could, Doctor, thanks.
Yeah. Currently, we have more older Canadians than younger Canadians, but we have 9 times as many pediatricians as we do geriatricians. There are only 305 registered geriatricians in the country. And again, when we talk about palliative care specialists, there are not as many as there needs to be. And this is where we're calling for a national human resources strategy, or at least targeted investments that the federal government, for example, could lead to try and promote training. We have more people applying for training positions than there are currently funded, and that's not helping us reach the critical mass that we need to meet the needs of an aging population.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Young, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses today. Mr. Mihailidis, I wanted to ask you, I wanted to first comment that my father, who passed away 8 years ago, he was so engaged with technology. He had his own Facebook page. He used this to communicate with his relatives, younger relatives in Scotland and Vancouver. He really took to it. And I think there is a sense that older people shy away from it, but I think that's a fallacy in many cases. And I want to talk to you about getting young people engaged in and thinking about this next generation and how they can get into jobs that would support our aging population, and what you think the federal government could do to encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Ms. Young. Thank you very much. And I love to hear those kinds of stories about your father. And, I hear those kinds of similar stories everywhere I go. So it's wonderful to hear and to see the uptake. And, and you're right, it is a complete myth. The number one consumer group that's using smartphones in terms of increasing sales is those over 65. And so, technology is becoming more pervasive. In terms of getting young people involved, actually, we're not seeing an issue. We're seeing an issue in trying to accommodate the number of young people who wish to get involved in this area. And that's what AgeWell's been doing. AgeWell has a very extensive training program where we train current masters, PhDs, undergraduate students in the area of age tech. And in our first 7 years as a network, we have put over 1,000 trainees through that program. And many of them are not academics anymore. Many of them are doing their own startup companies. Many of them are working in industry. Many of them are working in policy and government. AgeWell alone in the first 6 years has supported 46 startup companies in this area, many of which are actually starting to make a little bit of money, which is always wonderful to see. This is where we need to support things. We need to support the age tech sector to continue to grow. We need to encourage these young Canadians that are coming out of areas such as computer science and artificial intelligence that we are presenting really challenging and interesting problems for them to solve. And that's really what hooks them. And so the support for our startups in the area of age tech, but also the support of well-established industries and companies that realize that their number one consumer will become older people as well. And so helping them make that transition into the area to learn about the age tech sector, and more importantly, to learn about seniors themselves.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Sinha, I've been encouraging my residents to visit longtermcarestandards.ca to share their input on the topic of long-term care standards. And as the chair of the technical committee, how will you use this type of information that you'll be getting in order to come up with ideas for long-term care standards?
Thank you very much. No, this is an important question. It's an important task ahead, and I should make a comment that my colleague here is also the chair of the sister committee, if you will, the CSA committee that will also helping to develop the complementary set of standards. So we're both working closely together as chairs, and our committees will be working closely together. And one of the key goals that we both set out as chairs is we want to have deep public engagement. For example, that many of the times when sometimes committees like this exist or the work is done, people are not aware of how they can get engaged, and many people have a lot of things to say. So this initial survey that we put out, we've had close to 4,000 people who've already completed it. And this is everything from what do you want long-term care to look like? What are the issues that are important to you? We've asked people to comment on the themes at a very broad basis, just so that we can start hearing what matters most to Canadians, so that we do come up with standards that actually reflect what Canadians currently want and need, what they think is currently lacking, so that we can create standards that will better reflect that. This is only a start. We are also planning as chairs to lead the development of town halls, round tables, and really do deep public engagement. And the public will have an opportunity to do what we call a public review of our draft standards in January of 2022. So again, that we can get more feedback, because at the end of the day, when this feedback comes in, we want our committees to see what Canadians want and what they need. That's why we're really looking forward to all the input we can get, so that when we have these standards come out, people can say, these are the standards that we respect, these are what we want, and that can be enabled to become more broad-based in their use across the country, whether it be for accreditation, whether it be for funding, whether it be for enforcement, inspections, or even for new legislation. So that's what we're hoping to get from the feedback that we're soliciting right now.
Well, you've got a big job ahead of you. And I imagine you mentioned some other countries that we could learn from as far as long-term care standards. Who has the gold standard in the world?
I would wish to say that I can always point to one country that's got it right. I'm particularly a fan of Denmark in terms of the way they've actually thought about an entire continuum of care approach, thinking about how they can really focus on wellness and prevention, how they enable technology, as I'm sure my colleague Alex can speak about as well, but also how they think about really supporting people to age in their place, in their own homes where they want to be. And they don't have many of the issues that we have. And people say they're a small country. Sure, they're a small country, country, but they're a smart country that have really been proactive in how they've approached aging. So, but in terms of the creation of standards and there's a lot of variable practices around the use of these things. And so this is why we're going to be studying around the world about what's been done so that we can rob and duplicate the best ideas to create standards that will be meaningful for the Canadian paradigm.
Thank you very much.
Doctor. Thank you, Ms. Young. Madame Chabot, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Chabot, for 6 minutes, please. Thanks, and thanks to our two witnesses. My first question is for Dr. Sina. First of all, just as a preamble, I can understand that we can study what's being done in Denmark or in other areas in that part of Europe when it comes to the family and social programs. And we have looked at what they're doing to inspire ourselves for many of our social policy, including for early childhood. I agree with you that our seniors generally would like to age in place and would like to be able to stay home. This was the case before the pandemic, and it is certainly all the more so with the pandemic. And there's a very obvious reason for this. This whole issue of isolation, which was so particularly acute in care homes. But long-term care homes will always have a place in social services and healthcare services, because we know that to be eligible now to get into any of these places, the care needs are much greater. So there has to be a balance between the two. What I found troubling, and I think you also referred to this regarding the pandemic, and this is a question I wanted to ask you, and this is the Auditor General's report regarding the Public Health Agency of Canada, when it said that when they said that before the COVID pandemic, PHAC had not updated all of the pandemic planning, or had they tested the plans together with the provinces and territories. And the same report said that better preparation would have reduced to a minimum the serious illness, the overall number of mortalities, and the social upheaval in Canada attributable to the pandemic. Do you find this report troubling? And what solutions should we be implementing to be better prepared so that we could be more proactive? What kind of measures could have contributed to lessening the level of death and injury for the elderly?
Merci, and thank you very much for that question. This is what we're finding when we look at reports, not only at the federal level, but also at the provincial and territorial level, is that we're seeing from many of these reports that, Canada as a whole and in many of our jurisdictions just was not as well prepared for this pandemic as it could have been. And I think partly it may have been that we just didn't anticipate after SARS, for example, that something like this could happen, especially in our long-term care homes. SARS was something that was isolated to certain cities, for example, in particular, and more to something in hospitals. And so we've never seen something like this that's happened on this scale in congregate care settings for older people. But this really reminds us that, at all levels of government, whether it was the federal, the provincial, or even municipal government levels, for example, there were things that needed to have been done. There were things that we needed to anticipate. And I think there's a role that all three levels of government could have done better to better prepare themselves for the pandemic. In partnership with the Canadian Red Cross, the NIA actually published in December clear guidance, 29 evidence-informed recommendations that really speak to a public policy, but even a citizen-based level of things that we could do as a country to be better prepared to support older Canadians in emergencies and disaster response. And again, what we are seeing, it's being echoed at many levels in many reports, is that these are things that we can do with good quality planning, with clear pandemic preparedness plans. And as my comments said, earlier, as this pandemic was evolving, I think the challenges, when we say that this is a provincial or territorial matter, these issues were all of national significance. And I feel that there is a role that we could have better clarified or made sure that we enabled groups like PHAC or CIHI to have the mandate to actually say this is the guidance that needs to occur in these settings to better support. So there's stuff that could have been done before, there's stuff that needed to be done during, and hopefully from all of this, we'll learn what all three levels of government should be doing better to avoid the same issues next time.
Merci, mais en tout cas, c'était
Thank you. This was quite troubling to see that ahead of the game we were not able to prevent this. What would your clear recommendations be? Because you were commenting on the fact, but how could we ensure that this doesn't happen again? Because now we're experiencing pandemic, we're in the third wave, there are other crises, and we see that the most vulnerable people are often the most commonly victimized by these catastrophes. You said this in your own report. Any kind of disaster, whether it's a flood, the most vulnerable people are at risk, and they're the ones who get hit the hardest, if I could express it that way. So this report where it says that there was a delay to implement things, and we know that this had a decisive impact, what would your recommendations be, considering that you work nationally, if I've understood correctly?
Right. Briefly, if possible. Sorry, Doctor.
Yes, no. So again, our work with the Canadian Red Cross and the NIA, where we've come up with clear policy recommendations, these are things that I hope that are reflected in our new national long-term care standards. They will speak to emergency preparedness, pandemic preparedness, and this is a mechanism where we can actually come up with standards nationally, but then we have an obligation as the federal government to hopefully support the enforcement and the enabling of those standards at a provincial and territorial level as well.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Next, Ms. Gazan, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Mr. Sinha. In the province of Manitoba and much of the Western provinces, urban Indigenous peoples, and in particular First Nations communities have had disproportionately high rates of COVID-19. This has also been true for Black communities in Canada. Can you speak about how the social determinants of health have impacted particularly Indigenous and Black seniors during COVID-19, and how the government can implement policies that acknowledge these injustices. And I'd also like to include in the group, and this group as well, veteran seniors as well as newcomer seniors.
Many thanks for that question. Again, when we think about COVID, many people talked about it being the great equalizer, that it touches, everybody, but it touched certain populations like our BIPOC populations in particular, more so than others. And there are a number of reasons, because again, it largely comes down to the social determinants of health. When we look at the issues that we have in across Canada, we find that many of these communities are more likely to be economically disadvantaged. They're more likely to represent essential worker populations where they don't have the space or the ability to isolate in their own homes. They don't necessarily have access to jobs that have paid sick leave that's readily available to them. And we also know that, especially when you think about BIPOC seniors, for example, they're more likely to be living in intergenerational households and settings. And this is why, especially in our Indigenous communities in more rural and remote areas, for example, there was a real concerted effort to say, if COVID comes into our community, especially in homes where we have many people living in intergenerational situations, this can rip through an entire home very quickly quickly. And we're seeing this in regions of Peel and Scarborough and Toronto and many other urban settings. So the commonality here is poverty. The commonality is not having the mechanisms to allow people to isolate from each other when they need to, have access like paid sick leave. And I think we have to remember that, you know, racism and systemic poverty, these issues are what did not make COVID-19 the great equalizer, but really attack these communities in particular.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, as I mentioned in with our last witnesses, you know, guaranteed livable basic income, particularly for seniors. Poverty kills and it costs lives, and I really appreciate your comments around that. My next question, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, Alex. I'm going to try. Is it Milhalides?
Yep, that's perfect.
Wow. Okay. I taught in university for 20 years, and every time a course would start, I would get nervous trying to pronounce names right. It was my great embarrassment of every year was the start of a new course. But so many folks in my riding, you spoke about technology, do not have access to things like computers, cell phones, or internet. And, you know, you talked about impacts of social isolation, something that has been a deep concern for me, trying to support particularly seniors in our riding through the pandemic. I can't imagine how lonely one must feel living alone anyway. But another issue has actually been technical or technological literacy for older adults. One of the things I tried to get started in my community is a technology program and maybe even student jobs. So students would train seniors how to use technology. But as you indicated, these technologies are critical, especially during the pandemic, many not knowing how to use how for social connections and for updates on pandemic restrictions. Can you speak about how the federal government should address this gap and this critical need for even health, the health of seniors?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that question. And I also feel your pain at the start of every semester in class at the university as well. But you know, it does come down to education and in developing education programs that can be attainable by anyone, no matter where they live within the country. So Age Well, for example, we are looking at various models such as train the trainer models, working with organizations and partners like the Red Cross, who have the capabilities and the expertise in these types of educational models. And so really working with pan-Canadian and international organizations where we can then be developing the curriculum, be developing the materials. And so really it becomes a turnkey solution around education, and then this can be spread out. We also strongly believe within education happen within the community itself. So for example, Age Well has supported a couple of projects within Indigenous communities where we're taking Indigenous youth who are then working with the seniors in those communities to teach them those literacy skills, and not just teach them the skills, but to apply them. So for example, in the role of digital storytelling. And so these studies have been really fascinating to see that once you give a purpose to it as well and connect the community by it, how quickly these skills can be developed and spread across the country.
Thank you so
Ms.
much.
Kazan. Next, Mr. Viss, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for just an excellent time together so far. Dr. Milhalides, you mentioned in your 3 recommendations that there was a 16% decline in R&D investment in Canada. What are the structural issues leading to such a decline? And what can we do to improve it?
Yeah, you know, the easy answer obviously is lack of funding that's being provided into our key national funding programs, and those are mainly the tri-agencies, so CIHR, NSERC, and SHRC for the social sciences. The other obviously issue that we're seeing is the increased number of researchers. You know, the number of PhDs that we're graduating across Canada is increasing. The number of individuals going into academic positions has increased as well, to the point now where it is becoming quite a crowded marketplace, so to speak. So just the two simple variables of increased demand and lower supply is causing a lot of these bottlenecks. The big problem we're going to see, though, with COVID is because of all the funding resources, we're really directed towards COVID-based solutions and projects, which very much they was the right decision to make. The problem is other areas of research, whether health-related or otherwise, is really going to see a gap now in funding over the coming years, and that's the big worry of the academic community. So now is the time for increased investment in research in order to not just fund people, but to bring us back up to the baselines that we were at several years ago, and to continue to fill the gaps. We're seeing this.
That's very helpful.
Great, thank you.
I have a short amount of time.
Sure, thank you, Mr.
Dr. Sina, equally appreciated some of your earlier testimony. Yesterday, I skimmed through one of the NIA reports, and in the national senior strategy, it says one of the three underlying principles is value for money as it relates to taxpayer expenditures. You touched upon briefly old age security in your remarks, and I'm very interested to hear if there's been any studies done about how we distribute the funds that are collected and given to seniors. As you likely know, the minimum threshold without a tax on your OAS payments are $77,000, and I think you can receive OAS payments with an income of up to $130,000. So high income seniors are receiving OAS benefits from the government of Canada. And over the course of the pandemic, it's been really clear that seniors, say on GIS, and lower income seniors have been suffering greatly. And I'm just wondering if your organization or any of the research you're doing at Ryerson has discussed the possibility of redistributing the amount of total funds for old age security, but targeting low-income seniors more with the existing funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. And that was a bit of an eyebrow raise when we saw the announcement. It was great that we're recognizing that as we age, there are more expenses. And so thinking about that group of Canadians 75 and older, where you're more likely to have expenses for things like long-term care and things that are challenging your ability to live independently, are things that we need to recognize. But if it was my decision, I wouldn't have used the old age security mechanism. To do that, I would have looked at guaranteed income supplement. In our original national senior strategy, prior to the 2015 election, for example, we talked about poverty amongst older seniors, and we talked about the importance of making sure that our guaranteed income supplement was better and fairer, especially for older women, because they're the ones who are most likely to actually suffer from late life poverty. And so that was certainly a victory where we saw some increases for single, especially older women, as they age, to try and make the improvements there. Because again, as you said, old age security the recent increases can benefit people with up to $100,000+ of income in older age. But my bigger concern is the folks who are just making that guaranteed income supplement threshold. And so I think we need to think about ways to better support them. And bridging it to the technology issues, for example, one of the things that we worked on with TELUS, for example, this past year was actually creating a new smartphone plan for only seniors, the 2.2 million seniors who are on guaranteed income supplement. So for only $25 a month, you actually get a smartphone during the pandemic. And then by doing that, you can actually get onto technology like the COVID Alert app. You can participate in telemedicine or Zoom calls. And this is, again, a way of thinking about how do we bridge access to technology for low-income Canadians, not necessarily ones who can afford it, because that's where we're trying to challenge those barriers with smart policy.
Thank you, Mr. Viss.
Okay. Thank you both, and really appreciate your testimony today.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Mr. Lauzon for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Dr. Sina and Mr. Mihalidis for your excellent testimony. I'd like to begin with technology-related questions. You talked about the importance of the internet during your testimony. You know that our government has taken major steps to make connected Canada. For example, in Quebec, we're working with the province, and 100% of Quebec residents, where I am right now, will be connected by September 2022. That's a giant step, and that with high-speed services. Can you tell me what difference it would make today and what this is going to mean when all, in my case, Quebecers, will be connected by September 2022? In my riding, I have 40% of constituents who don't have access to the internet right now.
Much for that question. You know, access just to something simple as the internet can make a huge leap in terms of how older people can be connected, not just to information, but more importantly to their friends and family and in healthcare circles. And again, we've seen that during COVID, that more older people are getting online in order to access those services. Well, this is not going to go back to where we were before. This trend of online healthcare, telehealth, telerehab, is just going to continue to grow. And because of that, the infrastructure needs to be there. And so, you know, we applaud the efforts of this current federal government to be putting these at points of access in place. You know, however, the question that we hear all the time from older people is, you know, why was this not done 5 years ago? Why was this not done 10 years ago when we knew that the role of the information highway is going to be so critical as we move forward? And it's never really been an issue of technical capabilities. That's always been there. And we've seen that in many of our provinces just during the pandemic, where for decades we fought for telehealth services in the province of Ontario to no avail. And then all of a sudden over a weekend, it seems all of a sudden we have telehealth because of the pandemic. So if anything can be taken out of this in a positive light of what we've gone through is the fact that it has shown us that we have the capabilities. We have the capabilities here in Canada to do so. And now is the time to really push this initiative forward as quickly as possible.
Yeah, thanks for the great answer. I just forgot to tell the Mr. Chair that I have to share my time with my colleague. I have another question about we have a program that we call New Horizon. Most of the program that we've been asked from the organizations are related to education, formations, everything's related to the device, like tablets, internet, or they want to communicate with their family. Is this program should be like increase or do something better for the future, make sure that we support seniors?
Absolutely. This program should be increased. It should be considered a basic right of every senior and Canadian from coast to coast to coast. And so instead of making it a special project, so to speak, or a special fund, this needs to be a standard part of any budget moving forward.
OK. Vous savez, notre gouvernement a pris...
Well, you know, our government took a technology-related initiative, and it was to create a highly used site called Wellbeing Space for Canada. And this space is also used by seniors. And this is either directly online or on the phone or through text messages. You said that many people have accessible telephones, that many of them have the application on their phones. Is this the kind of tool that should be developed more so as to help our seniors in the future with technology?
Absolutely. You know, these types of services that can be delivered through off-the-shelf technologies are really critical. The other important aspect, though, is working with the telecom community and the device manufacturers to ensure that these types of services can work on phones that may be 2, 3, 5 years old. Because that's another trend that we see often among older adults is the phones that they use may have been the phone of their grandchild or their son or daughter and passing that on to them. And this is the state. And then all of a sudden, the COVID alert app does not work on the older version of the phone. So back compatibility is a big issue. And this is something that we need to work together. And this requires bringing industry in, bringing government together, bringing the manufacturers, the designers, and bringing the policy and regulatory bodies together as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Suite, Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Madame Chabot, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I have a technology question, and it's for the doctor, and I don't dare pronounce his family name. I will unbaptize you. So when it comes to technology, both in your presentation and in your studies, you are demonstrating in your, how much you can sort of remotely diagnose medical conditions with technology. You were saying that this is something that has to be continued. But do you also agree that there is a balance that's required here? I was listening to the General Practitioners Associations talking about, yes, that this is an additional tool, but this doesn't mean that we should do away with in-person consultations. And you need to have a highly performing internet all over the country. In Quebec, we have had recent agreements to develop internet in the province. But what's your point of view about the limitations of technology and its use in medicine?
Merci for this very important question. And you are absolutely right. Technology is a tool that must be used among many different tools, whether technological based or not. Whether it's a smart home system, a sensor someone is wearing to measure cardiac performance, or even a robot in someone's home, which is coming, if not already here. Again, these are tools. They're not replacements for the medical profession, and they're definitely not replacements for the family caregivers themselves. So no way do I imagine it's a replacement. No way do I foresee a robot replacing my friend Dr. Sinha here. Maybe some days he would like to have a robot though by his side though that will assist him moving forward.
Et sur le développement du réseau Internet.
And what about the development of the internet network? Is it essential?
Absolutely. We need to have broadband service across the country, coast to coast to coast, for this to happen. And it's amazing once that happens, the gates and the floodgates will open in terms of the types of technological solutions that we can implement and use to support not only our seniors, but Canadians everywhere.
Merci, Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Madame Chabot.
Our last series of questions, or last couple of questions, will come from Ms. Gazan, please. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. This question can be for either witness. The government only provided seniors with a one-time $300 payment to support them during the pandemic. So we're now at the 2-year mark. Of this health crisis, and there has been no other support provided. This is deeply concerning for me in my riding, where we are the third poorest riding in the country, where we have many seniors, including veterans, seniors who are veterans living in deep levels of poverty. Do you believe that this one-time $300 payment for seniors during the pandemic was sufficient, especially given the fact that we know that seniors experienced an increase in the costs they incurred during the pandemic? And if not, what is the alternative? So maybe I'll give you both a chance to answer quickly. We'll start with Mr. Sinha, sorry.
No worries. No. Yes. No, I mean, this is a challenge, right? I think the initial one-time payment was done at a time when we thought there were just, again, additional costs. If someone had to order things online, they had these extra unexpected expenses. They had to take taxis to get to places. These were extra expenses. And I think it was a good investment to be made, because I think it was very useful for many older Canadians in particular. I think definitely, there is that recent budget announcement of the old age security increase, and I believe that some of it was to be provided as a lump sum to start and then an ongoing theirs, but I don't know when that will happen. And I think we certainly have to look at, how people have been affected, because again, these issues didn't last only a few months. These have lasted well over a year now, and we have to consider that about how those challenges are affecting older Canadians.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that. And I think just on Dr. Sinha's point, those original decisions were really made without knowing what was coming. But now that we're more educated and we understand the situation and what could happen, obviously new decisions should be made using the best data possible.
I guess I asked that because, we, as indicated before, this pandemic has certainly highlighted inequalities in a real way. I would argue seniors, certainly during the pandemic, if we look at groups that have been marginalized even prior to the pandemic, seniors have been horribly marginalized. We need to do better, and I think it needs to happen immediately. What do you think the next steps are to ensure that seniors can live in dignity in this country?
Okay, that's the last question.
Well, to start off, I think, again, it's not just seniors in general, but we also think about low income seniors who tend to be more likely to be racialized or Indigenous. And this is where, again, thinking about if we were to do a limited top up, I'm thinking about the 2.2 million older Canadians who are living on, principally our guaranteed income supplement recipients, because they're the most lowest income people that we think about. So I think if we're thinking about financial measure, I would target those who are most vulnerable amongst us, those lower income people first, because that's an immediate financial relief measure that can be made as one aspect. But the other thing right now, the number one issue older Canadians want is to get their second doses of their vaccine as soon as possible, because again, they're still 90% of the people who are dying today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gazan. Thank you to Dr. Mihailidis, Dr. Sinha. Thank you for your leadership, for your expertise. We very much appreciate you being with us. It will greatly help our work with this study. And Dr. Mihailidis, if I may, thank you for the heroic efforts that you took to ensure that the technology would work, and for the enjoyment I understand that you provided to your neighbors. It's in all seriousness. So we very much appreciate you both being with us and the testimony that you've shared with us here today. Colleagues, I'm sure you are aware by now that the Budget Implementation Act has not been referred to the committee, so I wish you an excellent and productive constituency week, and look forward to seeing you on May the 25th, when our witness will be the Minister for Seniors. Do we have consent to adjourn the meeting? I believe we do.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have a good week, everyone. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.